Hook. He hadn't seen her in 20 years. 20 years of silence, of raising a boy alone, of convincing himself he'd forgotten. But the moment Logan Carter looked across his son's wedding reception and locked eyes with Olivia Bennett, the woman who once shattered him without saying goodbye, every wall he'd built came crashing down in a single heartbeat. She was standing near the bar, champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips, staring back at him like she'd just seen a ghost. And maybe she had, because the man she left behind was supposed to stay buried. If you want to find out what happens when the past refuses to stay dead, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. The morning of May 17th started with burnt toast and a missing cufflink. Logan Carter stood in the kitchen of his two-bedroom house in Westbrook, Connecticut, scraping black crumbs off a slice of sourdough while his phone buzzed on the counter with a text from the florist confirming delivery. The kitchen smelled like charcoal and old coffee. He tossed the ruined toast into the trash, pulled out another slice, and turned the dial on the toaster down 2 notches. He'd lived in this house for 11 years and still couldn't get that toaster right. "Dad?" Noah's voice came from the hallway, tight and slightly panicked. "I can't find my other cufflink." Logan wiped his hands on a dish towel and walked toward the sound. Noah was standing in front of the bathroom mirror in his dress shirt and slacks, one wrist buttoned with a silver cufflink, the other bare. His dark hair was combed back, but already rebelling at the temples, and his tie hung loose around his neck like he'd given up on it halfway through. "Did you check the dresser?" Logan asked. "Checked it twice." "The little dish on the nightstand?" "Empty." Logan leaned against the doorframe and folded his arms. His son was 24 years old, 6'1", broad-shouldered, and currently on the verge of a meltdown over a piece of jewelry the size of a dime. "You're getting married in 4 hours," Logan said. "You want to panic about a cufflink or you want to eat breakfast?" Noah turned from the mirror. His eyes, dark brown, same shade as Logan's, were wide and glassy. "I'm not panicking. You've been standing in this bathroom for 20 minutes. I'm preparing. You're hiding." Noah opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He sat down on the edge of the bathtub and rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe I'm hiding a little." Logan stepped into the bathroom and sat beside him. The tub was cold through his jeans. Neither of them said anything for a moment. From somewhere outside, a lawnmower droned in a neighbor's yard. The normalcy of it felt strange on a day like this. "You love Mia," Logan said. It wasn't a question. "More than anything." "Then you're going to walk into that venue, stand at the end of that aisle, and watch the best thing that ever happened to you walk toward you. And you're going to do it with or without a matching set of cufflinks." Noah exhaled a short, shaky laugh. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I've just been terrified enough times to know what it looks like." Noah looked at him, really looked. And for a second, Logan saw the boy he'd carried out of a group home 14 years ago. Small, quiet, suspicious of every adult who smiled at him. That boy had grown into this man sitting beside him on the edge of a bathtub on his wedding day, and the pride Logan felt was so fierce it almost hurt to breathe around it. "Thanks, Dad," Noah said quietly. Logan clapped him on the shoulder. "Check behind the dresser. Things roll." He went back to the kitchen and made toast that didn't burn. He scrambled 4 eggs, poured 2 glasses of orange juice, and set the table. When Noah came in 5 minutes later, cufflink found behind the dresser, just as predicted, they sat across from each other and ate in comfortable silence. Logan didn't say what he was thinking, which was that this was probably the last morning they'd share this kitchen as just the two of them, that after today this house would feel a little bigger and a little emptier, and that he was both proud and quietly heartbroken about that fact. He kept that to himself. Some things didn't need to be said out loud to be true. The ceremony was at a restored barn venue 20 minutes outside of town, surrounded by rolling fields and a border of sugar maples just coming into full leaf. The weather had cooperated. Blue sky, light breeze, temperature in the low 70s. Inside, the barn had been transformed with string lights, white linen, and clusters of wildflowers in mason jars. It was simple and warm, which was exactly what Mia and Noah had wanted. Logan sat in the front row on the groom's side, wearing a charcoal suit he'd bought for the occasion and a blue tie Noah had picked out for him. His hands were folded in his lap, and he kept his expression calm, but his chest was tight with something he couldn't name. Not sadness, exactly. Not joy, exactly. Something in between. A feeling that only parents who've raised a child alone can fully understand. The feeling of watching your entire purpose walk away from you toward a life of their own. The music started. The guests stood. And when Mia appeared at the end of the aisle in a simple white dress with her father beside her, Logan watched Noah's face transform. The nervousness evaporated. The fidgeting stopped. Noah's jaw softened, his eyes filled, and he stood a little straighter. He looked like a man who just realized he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Logan had to look down at his shoes for a moment. He blinked hard and pressed his tongue against the roof of his mouth until the pressure in his throat eased. The vows were personal and unrehearsed. Mia stumbled over a line about Noah's cooking, and the entire barn laughed. Noah's voice cracked when he told her she was the first person who ever made him feel like he didn't have to earn the right to be loved. Logan heard that line and felt it land somewhere deep in his ribs, in a place he didn't visit often. The officiant pronounced them married. The barn erupted, and Logan stood with everyone else, clapping, smiling, telling himself the dampness on his cheeks was from the breeze coming through the open doors. The reception was in an adjoining building, a newer structure with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the property. Tables were arranged in loose clusters, a DJ played soft jazz during dinner, and a bar ran along the far wall staffed by 2 bartenders in black vests. Logan estimated about 120 guests. He knew maybe 30 of them. The rest were Mia's family, college friends, co-workers, the extended world his son had built outside of their small house in Westbrook. Logan worked the room the way he always did at social events, politely, briefly, and with an exit strategy. He congratulated Mia's parents, shook hands with uncles and cousins he'd never met, accepted compliments about Noah with a modest nod. When a conversation lasted more than 5 minutes, he'd excuse himself to refill his glass or check his phone. He wasn't antisocial. He just had a limited supply of small talk, and he'd learned to ration it. By the time dinner was served, he'd settled at his assigned table with Noah's childhood friend Danny, Danny's wife, and an elderly couple from Mia's side, who spent most of the meal debating whether the chicken was overcooked. Logan ate quietly, drank 1 glass of wine, and watched the room with a kind of distant contentment. His son was married. The day had gone well. In a few hours he'd drive home, hang up his suit, and sit on the back porch with a beer and the quiet satisfaction of having done his job. That was the plan. The plan lasted until approximately 8:47 p.m. He'd gone to the bar for a second glass of wine, a small indulgence since he was driving, and was waiting behind a woman in a green dress who was ordering something complicated. The DJ had switched from jazz to something with a beat, and the dance floor was starting to fill. Logan watched Noah and Mia swaying together in the center, foreheads touching, laughing at something only they could hear. And then, for no reason he could explain afterward, he looked to his left. She was standing near the end of the bar, about 15 feet away. Dark hair pulled back loosely, a few strands falling against her neck. A navy blue dress, elegant but not flashy. She was holding a champagne flute and talking to a man in a gray suit, nodding at whatever he was saying, her expression polite but distant, the way people look when they're listening without hearing. Logan's hand tightened around the empty glass he was holding. The room didn't spin. The music didn't stop. Nothing cinematic happened. What happened was worse. A slow, dawning recognition that crept up from somewhere below his conscious mind and settled over him like a change in air pressure. He knew her. He knew the angle of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders, the specific tilt of her head when she was pretending to be interested in a conversation. He knew how her mouth curved when she was about to smile, but hadn't decided yet. He knew these things, the way you know the layout of a house you haven't lived in for years. Automatically, without thinking, from a time when knowing them was as natural as breathing. Olivia Bennett. He hadn't said that name out loud in at least a decade, maybe longer. He'd trained himself not to think it, not to let it surface during the quiet hours when the house was empty and his mind wandered into rooms he'd locked shut years ago. And now here she was, standing 15 feet away at his son's wedding reception, and every lock he'd ever installed was clicking open simultaneously. She hadn't seen him yet. The man in the gray suit was still talking, gesturing with his drink. Olivia nodded again, her eyes drifting absently across the room. And then they stopped. On him. The champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. Her expression didn't change, not immediately, but something shifted behind her eyes. A flicker, a recognition, a door opening in a place she'd thought was sealed. She stared at him for 2 full seconds, maybe 3, and in that span of time, Logan felt 20 years compress into a single held breath. She lowered the glass. The man in the gray suit was still talking. She wasn't listening anymore. Logan turned back to the bar. His heart was doing something it hadn't done in years, beating in a way that felt deliberate, like each pulse was a word it was trying to say. He ordered his wine. The bartender poured it. Logan thanked him, took the glass, and walked away from the bar toward the far side of the room, where a set of French doors opened onto a stone patio overlooking the fields. He stepped outside. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of cut grass and the faint sweetness of lilac from somewhere nearby. A few other guests were scattered across the patio. Smokers, couples seeking privacy. An older man on his phone. Logan walked to the railing and set his glass down. He pressed both palms flat against the stone and stared out at the darkening tree line. 20 years. He'd been 22. She'd been 20. They'd spent one summer together, 12 weeks that felt like a lifetime compressed into a handful of months. He'd been working construction in Bridgeport, she'd been interning at a marketing firm in New Haven, and they'd met at a mutual friend's barbecue where the burgers were undercooked and the beer was warm and none of it mattered because she'd laughed at his terrible joke about drywall and he'd been done for. Completely, irrevocably done for. They were together every day that summer. He drove 40 minutes each way to see her after work, still smelling like sawdust and joint compound, and she never once complained about it. They ate cheap takeout on her apartment floor because she didn't have a dining table. They argued about movies and music and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. She told him she wanted to run a company someday, and the way she said it, not as a dream but as a plan, made him believe her completely. And then August ended, and she got an offer from a firm in Chicago, and she took it. She told him on a Tuesday night, sitting on the hood of his truck in the parking lot of a Dairy Queen. She said it like she'd rehearsed it, calm, logical, explaining why it made sense, why the opportunity was too important to pass up, why long distance never worked for anyone. He'd listened without interrupting because he could see that she'd already made the decision before she sat down, and arguing with someone who's already left is just talking to the space where they used to be. She flew to Chicago on a Saturday morning. He drove her to the airport. They didn't cry. They didn't make promises. She kissed him once, said, "Take care of yourself, Logan," and walked through the security line without looking back. He sat in the parking garage for 45 minutes afterward, engine off, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how a person could be the center of your world at breakfast and a stranger by lunch. He never called her. She never called him. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter and more final than that. An understanding, mutual and unspoken, that what they'd had was a summer thing, a beautiful accident that wasn't built to survive a change in season. He told himself that for years until he almost believed it. Now she was inside, 15 feet from where he'd been standing, and his hands were trembling against the patio railing. "Get it together," he muttered to himself. He picked up his wine, took a sip, and went back inside. He avoided the bar. He found his table, sat down, and made conversation with Danny about the Red Sox bullpen, which was a safe and emotionally uncomplicated topic. He ate a slice of cake. He clapped during the speeches. He did all the things a father of the groom was supposed to do, and he did them well because Logan Carter was nothing if not dependable. But his eyes kept finding her. Across the room, at a table near the windows. She was sitting with the gray suit man and 2 other couples, her posture straight, her smile measured. She laughed once at something someone said, and even from 40 feet away, Logan could tell it wasn't real. It was her public laugh, the one she used when she was performing the role of pleasant company. He remembered the difference between that laugh and her real one. Her real one was louder, less careful, and usually accompanied by her covering her mouth with both hands, like she was trying to catch it before it escaped. He hated that he remembered that. Around 10 o'clock, Noah found him near the dessert table. "Hey, you doing okay?" Noah asked. His tie was loosened, his jacket was off, and he had the flushed, happy look of a man who'd been dancing for an hour straight. "I'm great," Logan said. "Hell of a party." "Mia's aunt cornered you earlier, didn't she? I saw her talking your ear off near the gift table." "She had a lot of opinions about property taxes." Noah laughed. "Yeah, that's Aunt Diane. She corners everyone. Listen, Mia wants to do one more dance before we head out. You gonna stick around?" "Wouldn't miss it." Noah squeezed his arm and disappeared back into the crowd. Logan watched him go, watched his son move through the room with an ease Logan himself had never possessed. Noah had always been better with people, more open, more trusting, more willing to let others in. Logan had tried to teach him caution, but Mia had taught him something better, that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It took Logan a long time to admit that she was right, and he was wrong about that. He was refilling his water glass at a side table when a voice behind him said, "Logan?" He turned. She was standing 3 feet away. This close, the years were visible. Faint lines at the corners of her eyes, a sharpness to her cheekbones that hadn't been there at 20, a steadiness in her gaze that came from years of boardrooms and difficult decisions. But her eyes were the same, dark, direct, carrying that specific intensity that had always made him feel like she could see through whatever front he was putting up. "Olivia," he said. His voice was even. He was proud of that. "I thought that was you," she said. "I almost didn't. You look different." 12 years of manual labor and a bad knee will do that. She smiled. Not the public smile. Something smaller, more private, with a hint of nervousness he'd never associated with her before. "How are you?" "Good. I'm good. Noah, the groom, he's my son." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Your son?" "Adopted, 14 years ago." "I didn't know you had a son." "Well," he shrugged, "it's been a while." 20 years. About that, yeah. They stood there, 3 feet apart, surrounded by 120 people, and the bass thump of a song neither of them was listening to. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, exactly. It was loaded, heavy with everything they weren't saying and everything they'd never said. "How do you know Mia?" Logan asked, because someone had to say something practical. "Her mother, Catherine. We sit on the same nonprofit board. Catherine invited me." She paused. "I almost didn't come." "Why not?" "I don't know. Long drive. I've been traveling all week. I almost stayed home." She said it simply, but there was something underneath. A suggestion that she was recalculating what would have happened if she'd made a different choice tonight. "I'm glad you came," Logan said, and immediately wished he'd chosen different words. Too much, too fast. He tried to recover. "I mean, it's good to see a familiar face. I don't know most of these people. You never did like crowds." "Still don't." "But you're here." "My son's getting married. I'd stand in a stadium full of strangers for that." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "You sound like a good father." "I try. Some days I'm better at it than others." Another silence. The DJ transitioned to a slow song. Couples drifted onto the dance floor. Logan saw Noah and Mia among them, wrapped around each other, swaying barely in time. "I should let you get back to your table," Logan said. Olivia glanced over her shoulder at the gray suit man who was scrolling through his phone. "He's not going to notice I'm gone," she said. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a statement of fact, delivered with the kind of flat resignation that comes from long experience. "Husband?" Logan asked. "Partner. 7 years." Logan nodded. He didn't ask more. The way she'd said it, neat, partner, not fiancé, not boyfriend, not even the man I love, told him enough. "Logan." She said his name carefully, like she was testing whether it still fit in her mouth. "I know this is strange, running into each other here after all this time. But I'd like to... I don't know." She stopped. Olivia Bennett, CEO, nonprofit board member. A woman who probably gave quarterly presentations to rooms full of investors without breaking a sweat was struggling to finish a sentence. Could we get coffee sometime? Catch up? I know that sounds like a line from a bad movie, but I genuinely, okay, he said. She blinked. Really? You asked. I said okay. That was faster than I expected. I've learned not to overthink things. Usually makes them worse. She smiled again. That small, private one. And something in Logan's chest shifted, like a piece of furniture being moved in a room he'd thought was empty. Give me your number, she said. I'll text you. They exchanged numbers. It took 30 seconds. Then she walked back to her table, and he walked back to his, and neither of them looked at each other for the rest of the night. But Logan felt her there, the way you feel weather changing before the rain actually starts. He drove home at midnight. The house was dark and quiet. Noah's room was empty. He and Mia were staying at a hotel near the venue before flying out for their honeymoon in the morning. Logan hung up his suit, brushed his teeth, and sat on the edge of his bed in the dark for a long time. His phone was on the nightstand. No messages. He picked it up and opened the new contact he'd saved. Olivia Bennett. Just seeing the name on his screen made his pulse do something stupid. He set the phone down, turned off the light, stared at the ceiling. 20 years. A whole life lived in the space between that airport goodbye and tonight. He'd worked 6 different jobs, built a carpentry business from nothing, adopted a 10-year-old boy who didn't trust adults, coached Little League, attended parent-teacher conferences alone, sat in hospital waiting rooms alone, celebrated holidays with a table set for 2. He'd dated a few women over the years. Nothing serious, nothing lasting. He told himself he was too busy, that Noah needed his full attention, that there wasn't room for romance in a life already full of responsibilities. But the truth, the one he kept in the same locked room where he stored summer memories and airport goodbyes, was simpler than that. He'd never met anyone who made him feel the way Olivia had, and rather than settle for less, he'd chosen to go without. It wasn't noble, it wasn't romantic, it was just the math of his particular heart, and the numbers never added up with anyone else. Now she was back, or at least her phone number was in his contacts, which was either the beginning of something or the setup for another disappointment, and Logan had enough experience with both to know he couldn't tell the difference yet. He closed his eyes. Sleep came slowly, in fragments, interrupted by images he couldn't control. A parking lot, a Tuesday night, the taste of cheap soft serve, the sound of her voice saying his name like it was a word she'd invented. 3 days passed before she texted. He was in his workshop, a converted garage behind the house where he ran his furniture restoration business, sanding the top of a 19th century farmhouse table when his phone buzzed. He'd been expecting the text and also not expecting it, the way you expect thunder after lightning but still flinch when it comes. Hi, it's Olivia. Is that coffee offer still open? He read it twice. Set the phone down, picked it up again. Still open, he typed back. When works for you? Saturday morning, there's a place called Marlowe and Elm on Chapel Street. Do you know it? He didn't, but he said he did because saying, I'll find it, felt too eager, and saying, where's that, felt too indifferent, and the narrow space between those two options was where Logan had been living for the past 3 days. Saturday came. He drove to Chapel Street, found the coffee shop, a narrow storefront with exposed brick and too many plants, and arrived 12 minutes early because he'd overestimated traffic and underestimated his anxiety. He ordered a black coffee, sat at a table near the window, and pretended to read the newspaper someone had left behind. She walked in at exactly 10 o'clock, punctual. He remembered that about her. She was wearing jeans and a white blouse, her hair down, no jewelry except a thin gold watch. She looked different from the wedding, less polished, more human. The corporate armor was off. She looked like the woman he'd known 20 years ago, if that woman had been through a war and come out the other side with better posture and more careful eyes. You're early, she said, pulling out the chair across from him. Habit. You always were early for everything. I remember you used to sit in your truck outside my apartment building 20 minutes before you were supposed to pick me up. I was afraid of being late. You were afraid of a lot of things. She said it gently, not as an accusation. Me too, for what it's worth. The waitress came. Olivia ordered a cortado. Logan didn't know what that was, but didn't ask. When the waitress left, they sat in the kind of silence that exists between two people who have too much to say and no idea where to start. "So," Olivia said, 20 years. "You said that at the wedding." It bears repeating. "Where do you want to start?" She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup even though it hadn't arrived yet. "I don't know. How about the beginning? What happened after I left?" Logan leaned back in his chair. "That's a long story." "I have time." So he told her. Not all of it. Not the hard parts. Not yet. But the outline. He told her about the years after she left. How he'd thrown himself into work, moved from construction into finished carpentry, saved enough to start his own restoration business. He told her about the apartment in Milford that flooded twice, the roommate who stole his tools, the winter he ate ramen for 3 months straight because a client stiffed him on a big job. And then he told her about Noah. "I was 28, he said. A friend of mine worked in family services. She called me one day and said there was a 10-year-old boy in a group home who'd been through 4 foster placements in 2 years. Nobody wanted him. He was angry. He was difficult. He broke things. He didn't talk." Logan paused. The cortado arrived. He waited while the waitress set it down. "She asked if I'd consider fostering him. I said no. Told her I was single, I worked 60 hours a week, I didn't know anything about kids. She said, just come meet him, so I did. And he looked at me like I was just another adult who was going to make promises and disappear. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in the mirror enough times growing up. He took a sip of his coffee. It was lukewarm. I went home that night and couldn't stop thinking about him. Went back the next week, and the week after that. Started the foster paperwork 2 months later. Finalized the adoption when he was 12. Olivia was watching him with an expression that was hard to define. Not pity, not admiration, something more complex. That must have been incredibly hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the best. How was it? The early years? Logan laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that carries weight. Brutal. He tested me constantly. Broke a window the first week. Refused to eat anything I cooked. Wouldn't talk to me for days at a time. His school called so often they had my number memorized. There were nights I sat in the driveway after he'd gone to bed and wondered what the hell I was doing, whether I was making things worse for him. But you stayed. Where was I going to go? He didn't need another adult who quit. He needed someone who would still be there in the morning, even when the night before had been awful. Olivia was quiet for a moment. She lifted her cup, took a slow sip, set it down. You became the father you never had. The words hit Logan like a palm strike to the chest. Not because they were wrong, but because they were so exactly right that hearing them from someone else, from her, made something crack open that he'd been holding shut for years. Something like that, he said. Logan, I'm sorry Don't, he said quietly. You don't need to apologize for Chicago. That was 20 years ago. We were kids. I wasn't going to apologize for leaving. I was going to apologize for not calling, for not checking in, for vanishing like none of it mattered. Did it matter? She met his eyes. It mattered more than I've ever admitted to anyone. The coffee shop was filling up around them. A line had formed at the counter. Someone's child was crying near the pastry case. The normal, noisy texture of a Saturday morning pressed in from all sides, indifferent to the conversation happening at the table near the window. Your turn, Logan said. What happened after Chicago? Olivia's story was different from his. Faster, louder, bigger. She'd gone from the marketing firm to an MBA at Northwestern, then into consulting, then into the executive track at a tech startup that she'd eventually taken over as CEO when the founder flamed out in a public meltdown. She'd grown the company from 40 employees to 400, expanded into 3 new markets, been profiled in business magazines, spoken at conferences. On paper, it was a success story that most people would envy. And off paper, Logan asked. She turned her cup slowly on the saucer. Off paper, I work 70 hours a week. I haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years, and I go home every night to a man who knows my schedule better than he knows my thoughts. The guy from the wedding? Gray suit? Marcus, yes. 7 years is a long time. It is. It's long enough to build a life together and short enough to realize you built it wrong. She paused, choosing her words. Marcus is a good man. He's stable, he's reliable, he's never once raised his voice at me. But somewhere around year 4, we stopped being partners and started being roommates. We eat dinner in the same room and talk about logistics. Who's picking up the dry cleaning, when the plumber's coming, whether we're attending the benefit on the 12th. That's it. That's the relationship. Have you told him that? I've tried. He doesn't hear it. Or he hears it and thinks I'm being dramatic. The last time I brought it up, he said we were fine. Said every long-term couple goes through phases. Said I was putting too much pressure on the relationship. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Maybe he's right. Maybe I expect too much. Or maybe you expect exactly the right amount and settled for someone who can't meet it. She looked at him sharply. That's a bold thing to say to someone you just reconnected with 3 days ago. You asked me to be honest. I'm being honest. I didn't ask you to be honest. I asked you for coffee. Same thing with me. The corner of her mouth twitched. You haven't changed. I've changed plenty. I just never learned to sugarcoat. They stayed for 2 more hours. The conversation drifted from heavy to light and back again. Memories of that summer, arguments they'd had that seemed important at the time, the restaurant in Bridgeport where they'd had their first date and the food was terrible but neither of them cared. Olivia laughed at the memory, her real laugh, the loud one, caught behind both hands. And Logan felt something dangerous stir in his chest. Not desire, not exactly. Something older and deeper. The feeling of being understood without having to explain yourself. He'd forgotten what that felt like. When they finally stood to leave, the lunch crowd was arriving. They walked out onto Chapel Street, squinting in the midday sun. This was good, Olivia said. Better than I expected. What did you expect? Awkwardness, painful small talk, regret. And instead, she looked at him with those direct, dark eyes. Instead, it felt like no time had passed at all, and that terrifies me. Me too, Logan said. They agreed to meet again. No specific date, no formal plan, just a mutual understanding that this wasn't over, that a single coffee shop conversation couldn't contain everything they needed to say. She texted him the next day. He texted back. And so it began. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm that neither of them had planned or fully understood. Coffee on Saturdays. Long walks through Edgewood Park during the week when Olivia's schedule allowed. Phone calls that started as brief check-ins and stretched into hour-long conversations that left them both up past midnight. They talked about everything. Work, his restoration projects, her quarterly board meetings, family, his memories of growing up in a house where affection was rationed, her relationship with a mother who measured love in achievements. Noah. The milestones, the setbacks, the night he'd come home from school in 7th grade crying because a kid had called him an orphan and Logan had held him on the couch until he fell asleep. What did you say to him? Olivia asked. They were sitting on a bench in the park, late afternoon, the sun dropping behind the trees. I told him the truth. That being adopted didn't make him less of my son. That I chose him. That choosing someone is a more powerful thing than biology. Do you believe that? I've lived it for 14 years, so yeah, I believe it. She was quiet for a while. A jogger passed. A dog barked somewhere. I chose Marcus because he was safe, she said eventually. Not because he made me feel alive. Not because he challenged me or saw through me the way you used to. I chose him because after years of building my career and proving myself in rooms full of men who didn't think I belonged there, I wanted someone who wouldn't be another battle. Someone easy. There's nothing wrong with wanting easy. There is if easy means empty. Logan didn't respond immediately. He watched a pair of ducks glide across the pond, leaving V-shaped wakes in the dark water. Olivia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. Why are we doing this? She turned to look at him. What do you mean? I mean, the coffee, the walks, the late-night calls. What is this? Because if this is just 2 old friends reconnecting, then fine. But it doesn't feel like that to me. And I think you know it doesn't feel like that to you either. She didn't look away. He gave her credit for that. Some people, when confronted with a question they're not ready to answer, find somewhere else to point their eyes. Olivia had never been that person. It's not just friendship, she said. You know it's not. Then what is it? I don't know yet. And that's the honest answer. I'm in a relationship, Logan. A flawed one, a fading one, but I'm in it. And you're the man I walked away from 20 years ago, and being near you again makes me feel things I thought I'd outgrown. I don't know what to do with that. Neither do I. So what do we do? He looked at her for a long time. The light was changing, going gold and soft through the leaves. She had a leaf caught in her hair near her left ear. He resisted the urge to reach over and brush it away. We keep talking, he said, and we figure it out. But we don't lie to each other. Not about what this is, not about what we want. If it's going to be real, it has to start with the truth. She nodded slowly. The truth. I can do that. They walked back to their cars as the park lights flickered on. He opened her car door, an instinct, not a gesture, and she looked at him with something that might have been gratitude or might have been something more complicated. Good night, Logan. Good night. He watched her drive away. Then he got into his own truck, sat in the driver's seat, and pressed his forehead against the steering wheel. He was in trouble. He knew it the way a sailor knows bad weather, not from the sky, but from the feeling in his bones. When he got home, the house was dark. Noah and Mia were still on their honeymoon, 2 weeks in Portugal. The kitchen was clean, the sink was empty, and the silence had a physical weight to it. Logan made a sandwich he didn't eat, poured a glass of water, and sat at the table where he'd eaten breakfast with Noah on the morning of the wedding. That morning felt like a year ago. Everything before Olivia walked back into his life had begun to feel like a previous chapter. Familiar but finished, separated from the present by a line he couldn't uncross. His phone buzzed, a text from Olivia. Thank you for today, for the truth. He typed back, always. Then he set the phone down and looked around the empty kitchen. He thought about Noah, about the boy who'd tested every boundary and the man who'd grown past them, about the years of loneliness he'd called contentment because the word sounded better, about the woman in the navy dress at the end of the bar, champagne glass frozen, staring at him like she'd just seen something she'd been searching for. He thought about Marcus, the man in the gray suit. A good man, Olivia had said, stable, reliable, never raised his voice. Logan felt a complicated pang. Not jealousy, not yet, but something adjacent to it. The awareness that someone else had been living the life he'd once imagined and doing it badly enough that Olivia was sitting on park benches with her ex talking about truth and emptiness. He washed his glass, turned off the kitchen light, walked down the hallway past Noah's empty room and into his own. The bed was made because he always made it. The nightstand held a lamp, a paperback he'd been reading for 3 weeks, and his phone. He changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, brushed his teeth, and lay down in the dark. The ceiling stared back at him, blank and unhelpful. He thought, I'm 32 years old. I've spent the last 14 years being a father, a provider, a steady hand. I've been responsible. I've been careful. I've been all the things I was supposed to be. And somewhere in the middle of all that responsibility and carefulness, I forgot what it felt like to want something for myself. Now he remembered. And the remembering was the most dangerous thing that had happened to him in years. He rolled onto his side and closed his eyes. Sleep would come eventually. It always did, even on the nights when his mind refused to quiet down. Tomorrow he'd go back to the workshop, sand another table, answer client emails, live the life he'd built. And he'd carry this new, terrifying, impossibly alive feeling with him like a second heartbeat, hidden, persistent, and completely beyond his control. The last thing he thought before sleep finally took him was her voice, clear as the day she'd left, saying his name in a coffee shop like she'd been practicing it for 20 years. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with dialogue-driven drama and emotional depth. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with dialogue-driven drama and emotional depth. Noah came home from Portugal on a Thursday afternoon, tanned and loose-limbed, carrying a suitcase covered in baggage stickers and a small ceramic tile he'd bought for Logan at a market in Lisbon. He set it on the kitchen counter and said, "It's a rooster. Apparently they're good luck." Logan turned the tile over in his hands. It was hand-painted, bright red and yellow, slightly uneven at the edges. "It's nice," he said. "How was the trip?" "Incredible." The food, Dad. You wouldn't believe the food. Mia ate an entire octopus by herself, like a whole one. Good for her. Noah dropped into a kitchen chair and stretched his legs out. He looked happy, genuinely, deeply happy, in a way that reminded Logan of the first time the boy had laughed in this house. It had taken 4 months. 4 months of silence and slammed doors and meals eaten standing at the counter because Noah refused to sit at the table. And then one evening, Logan had tripped over the dog's water bowl and slid across the kitchen floor in his socks like a cartoon character, and Noah had laughed so hard he'd choked on his milk. It was the most beautiful sound Logan had ever heard. "You okay?" Noah asked, studying his father's face. "You look tired." "I'm fine, just been busy with the Harrington table. Big project." "You always say you're fine." "Because I usually am." Noah gave him a look, the same skeptical squint he'd had since he was 12, the one that said he didn't fully believe what he was hearing but wasn't going to push. "All right. Hey, Mia wants to have you over for dinner this weekend, Saturday. She's going to cook that risotto you like." "Sounds good. Bring wine, the good stuff, not that grocery store bottle you brought last time." "That was a perfectly fine bottle of wine." "It had a screw cap, Dad." "Screw caps are efficient." Noah shook his head, grinning, and pulled out his phone to text Mia. Logan watched him for a moment. This man, this person he'd built a life around, and felt the familiar swell of pride mixed with something sharper. Because there was a thing Logan wasn't telling him, a thing that had been growing in the margins of his days for the past 3 weeks, and the longer he didn't say it, the heavier it became. He almost said it then, almost opened his mouth and told Noah about Olivia, about the wedding, the coffee shop, the park bench, the late-night calls. But Noah was smiling at his phone, still glowing from his honeymoon, and Logan couldn't bring himself to puncture that glow with something he didn't fully understand yet himself. So he said nothing, and the silence grew another layer. Saturday night at Noah and Mia's apartment was warm and loud and full of the specific chaos that young married couples generate. Half-unpacked wedding gifts stacked on the dining table, a bookshelf that hadn't been assembled yet leaning against the wall, Mia's cat weaving between chair legs. Logan brought a bottle of wine without a screw cap. Mia made risotto that was slightly overcooked, but nobody mentioned it. They ate and talked and laughed, and for 2 hours Logan felt like everything was normal, like the ground beneath his feet was solid. Then Mia said casually over dessert, "Oh, Logan, you'll never guess who emailed me this week. Olivia Bennett. She was at the wedding. Do you remember her? Catherine's friend? She sent the nicest note about the ceremony." Logan set down his fork. "I remember her. She's so impressive. CEO of that tech company. What's it called? Meridian something." Mia looked at Noah. "We should invite her and Marcus to dinner sometime." "Sure," Noah said, scooping ice cream. "The more the merrier." Logan picked up his fork again. His hand was steady. His heart was not. "I actually ran into her at the reception. We talked for a bit." "Oh yeah?" Mia said. "She seems lovely." "She is." The conversation moved on. Noah started talking about a promotion he was up for at work, and Mia described a disastrous attempt to assemble an IKEA dresser. And Logan nodded and laughed in all the right places, while a voice in the back of his head whispered that he was being a coward. That every day he didn't tell Noah the truth was a day he was building a lie by omission, brick by quiet brick. He drove home through empty streets, his phone buzzed at a red light. "Olivia, can you talk?" He called her from the driveway, engine still running. "Hey," she said. Her voice had that late-night texture, lower, softer, stripped of the crisp professionalism she wore during the day. "I'm sorry it's late. I just got out of a board call that ran 3 hours. It's fine, I just had dinner at Noah's." "How is he?" "Happy, sunburned. His wife overcooked the risotto." She laughed, the real one. "That sounds perfect." "It was." He paused. "Mia mentioned you, said you emailed her about the wedding." "I did. I liked her. She reminded me of, I don't know, someone who says exactly what she's thinking without calculating the impact first." "That's Mia. She once told my barber his haircuts were getting lazy, to his face, in the chair." Olivia laughed again. Then the laughter faded and the line went quiet. Not dead air quiet, but the kind of quiet that comes when someone is deciding whether to say something important. Logan, I need to tell you something. He turned off the engine. The driveway went dark except for the porch light. Go ahead. Marcus found my phone this morning. He saw our messages. Logan's stomach dropped. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, more like a slow elevator descent, a steady sinking that left him queasy and alert. What happened? We had a conversation, if you can call it that. He was calm about it, which almost made it worse. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse me of anything. He just sat at the kitchen table with my phone in his hand and said, "Who's Logan?" What did you tell him? The truth. That you were someone I knew a long time ago and that we'd reconnected at the wedding, that we'd been meeting for coffee and talking. And? And he asked if I was sleeping with you. I said no. He asked if I wanted to. I didn't answer. Logan pressed his head back against the headrest. The porch light threw a yellow rectangle across the hood of his truck. A neighbor's sprinkler hissed in the darkness. Olivia. I know. What did he do after that? He put my phone down, went to the bedroom, and closed the door. When I went in 20 minutes later, he was asleep, or pretending to be. This morning he made coffee and acted like nothing happened. That's his way. He absorbs things and moves on. He doesn't process. He files. That's not healthy. I know that too. So what happens now? I don't know. That's why I called. Because I don't know, and you're the only person I can say that to without feeling like I have to have an answer ready. They talked for another 40 minutes. About Marcus, about the messages, about the gap between what a relationship looks like from outside and what it feels like from inside. Olivia spoke with the precision of someone who had spent years analyzing business problems, breaking complex issues into components, identifying leverage points and risk factors. But this wasn't a business problem. This was her life, and the analytical framework kept cracking whenever she got close to the emotional core of it. I haven't been happy with him in 2 years, she said at one point, her voice flat and certain. Maybe longer, and I've known it, Logan. I've known it, and I've stayed because leaving felt like admitting failure, and I've never been good at failing. Leaving a relationship that isn't working isn't failure. Tell that to the woman who built her entire identity on succeeding at everything she touches. You didn't fail. The relationship failed. Those are different things. Are they? Yes. You're not the only person in it. It takes 2 people to build something, and it takes 2 people to let it fall apart. You didn't do this alone. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. When you adopted Noah, were you scared? Every single day for the first 3 years. How did you do it anyway? I decided that being scared wasn't a good enough reason to stop. And I decided that the kids sitting in that group home deserved someone who would be scared and show up anyway. That's what this feels like, being scared and showing up anyway. That's what most important things feel like. She exhaled, a long, uneven breath that he felt through the phone like a physical thing. I should go. I have a 7 a.m. meeting and I haven't slept. Olivia, yeah? Whatever you decide, about Marcus, about this, about any of it, you need to decide it for yourself, not for me. Not because of me. I'm not going to be the reason you blow up your life. You're not the reason, Logan. You're the mirror. There's a difference. She hung up. He sat in the truck for another 10 minutes, staring at the porch light, trying to figure out whether what she'd said was profound or devastating or both. The next 2 weeks were a high-wire act. Logan and Olivia continued meeting. Same coffee shop, same park bench, same gravitational pull toward each other, but the stakes had shifted. Marcus knew. The secret wasn't a secret anymore. It was a known quantity, sitting in the corner of Olivia's life like an unexploded device, and every conversation she and Logan had now carried the awareness that they were building something on ground that could give way at any moment. They didn't touch. That was the line they'd drawn, unspoken but absolute. No hugs, no hand-holding, no shoulder brushes that lingered a beat too long. The restraint was agonizing in a way Logan hadn't anticipated. It wasn't about desire, or not only about desire. It was about the constant, conscious effort of being near someone you wanted to reach for and keeping your hands at your sides. like standing next to a fire on a cold night and refusing to step closer. One Wednesday afternoon, they were walking the trail along the river behind the park. The path was narrow, shaded by oaks, and they walked close enough that their arms almost touched, but didn't. Olivia was telling him about a meeting she'd had with her board, a dispute over expansion strategy that had turned personal, and Logan was listening with the focused attention he always gave her, when she stopped mid-sentence and said, "Marcus asked me to go to couples therapy." Logan stopped walking. "What did you say?" "I said I'd think about it." "And?" "And I've been thinking about it for 4 days, and I still don't have an answer." She kicked a pebble off the trail. It bounced into the underbrush. "Part of me thinks I should go, that I owe him that much after 7 years, that walking away without trying to fix it is quitting. And the other part? The other part knows that you can't fix something if one person has already left the room. And I left the room a long time ago, Logan. Long before the wedding, long before you." "Then tell him that." "I've tried. He doesn't hear it. He hears she's stressed, she's overworked, she needs a vacation. He cannot conceive of the possibility that the relationship itself is the problem, because in his mind, the relationship is fine. We have a house. We have routines. We don't fight. To him, that's enough." "Is it enough for you?" She looked at him. The afternoon light caught the side of her face, and for a second she looked exhausted. Not physically, but in the deeper way, the kind of tired that sleep can't fix. "You already know the answer to that." He did, but he needed her to say it, because as long as she was the one saying it, he could tell himself he wasn't pulling her away from Marcus. He was just standing still while she walked toward him. The distinction mattered. It was thin, maybe even self-serving, but it mattered. They kept walking. The river murmured beside them. Neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence was comfortable in a way that silences rarely are. Two people who had run out of easy things to say, but weren't afraid of the hard ones. "Noah's coming over for dinner tomorrow," Logan said eventually. "You should tell him about us." "There isn't an us. Not yet." "There's something, Logan, and he should hear about it from you before he hears it from someone else." She was right. He knew she was right. The same way he'd known for weeks that the omission was growing teeth, that every dinner and phone call with Noah that didn't include the words, "I've been spending time with someone," was another small betrayal of the trust they'd spent 14 years building. "I'll tell him," Logan said. "Tomorrow." He didn't tell him tomorrow. Noah came over with a six-pack and a bag of takeout from the Thai place on Main Street. They ate on the back porch, watching the fireflies pulse in the yard like slow Morse code. Noah talked about work. The promotion was looking good, his manager had hinted at a raise, and about Mia's plan to repaint their bathroom, which Noah opposed on the grounds that sage green was just a fancy name for the color of that soup you made that one time that was awful. Logan laughed. He opened another beer. He watched his son talk and felt the words building in his throat like a physical pressure. And every time he got close to saying them, something else came out instead. "You remember that table I'm restoring? The Harrington one? The farmhouse table? Yeah. Found rot in 2 of the legs. Had to source matching lumber from a salvage yard in Vermont." "That sounds like a pain." It was, but the table's worth saving. He heard himself talking about wood rot and salvage lumber and knew he was stalling. Knew it the way a swimmer knows they're getting tired. The strokes still look right, but the effort behind each one is doubling. When Noah left at 10, Logan stood at the kitchen sink and washed the dishes by hand, even though the dishwasher worked fine. The hot water scalded his fingers. He didn't adjust the temperature. The small discomfort felt deserved. His phone buzzed. "Olivia." "Did you tell him?" "No." A pause, then, "Why not?" "I couldn't find the words." "Logan, you're the most direct person I know. You've never had trouble finding words." "I've never had to tell my son that the father he trusted completely has been keeping secrets from him for a month. It's not a secret. It's a part of your life you haven't shared yet." "That's the same thing, and you know it." She didn't argue. That was one of the things he appreciated most about her. She knew when pushing back would help and when it would only create resistance. "You'll tell him when you're ready. And if I'm never ready, then he'll find out anyway, and it'll be worse." She was right, again. The problem with falling for a brilliant woman was that she was usually right, and being right gave her a kind of moral clarity that Logan found both admirable and deeply inconvenient. He told Noah 4 days later, on a Sunday morning over coffee at the kitchen table. He didn't plan it, didn't rehearse it. Noah had stopped by to return a drill he'd borrowed, and they were sitting across from each other, and the morning light was coming through the window at the exact angle it had been on the day of the wedding. And something about that parallel, the symmetry of it, father and son at the same table, light falling the same way, cracked open the seal Logan had been holding shut. "I need to tell you something," he said. Noah set down his coffee. His expression shifted from relaxed to alert in half a second, the reflexive wariness of a kid who'd spent his first 10 years bracing for bad news. "Okay. I've been seeing someone. Not dating, not exactly, but spending time with someone. A woman I knew a long time ago, before you." Noah's face was unreadable. "How long?" "About a month since the wedding." "A month?" Noah repeated the word slowly, like he was testing its weight. "You've been seeing someone for a month and you didn't tell me?" "I should have told you sooner. I know that." "Who is she?" "Her name is Olivia Bennett. She was at the wedding, Mia's mother's friend. I knew her 20 years ago." "Knew her how?" "We were together. One summer in our early 20s. She left for a job in Chicago. We lost touch." Noah was quiet. He picked up his coffee, took a sip, put it down. His jaw was tight. "And now she's back." "She's back." "Is she single?" Logan hesitated. It was a fraction of a second, but Noah caught it. "She's in a relationship," Logan said. "Been falling apart for a long time. That's what she tells me." "That's what she tells you." Noah's voice had an edge now. Not anger yet, but the precursor to it, the way a sky darkens before a storm. "Dad, do you hear yourself?" "I hear myself." "You're seeing a woman who's in a relationship. For a month. And you didn't tell me about any of it. How is that okay?" "It's not okay. That's why I'm telling you now." "Now? A month later? After you've already, what, had coffee? Taken walks? What exactly have you been doing?" "Talking, that's all. We've been talking." People who are just talking don't hide it for a month. The words hit Logan in the chest. Not because they were unfair, they were entirely fair, but because they came from Noah, whose trust Logan had spent 14 years earning one careful day at a time. To hear that trust questioned, even justifiably, was like being cut with a blade he'd sharpened himself. "You're right," Logan said. "I should have told you sooner. I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of this. Of you looking at me the way you're looking at me right now." Noah pushed back from the table. He stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his back to Logan. His shoulders were tense, his hands were jammed in his pockets. For a moment he looked exactly like the angry 12-year-old who used to stand in that same spot, staring out at the yard, refusing to speak. "You've always told me to be honest," Noah said without turning around. "Every time I screwed up as a kid, every time I lied about something stupid, you said the same thing. Just tell me the truth, Noah. I can handle anything except you lying to me." "I remember." "So what is this then? What do you call a month of not telling me?" "A mistake. I call it a mistake." Noah turned around. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. He was holding it in, the way Logan had taught him to. And right now, Logan hated himself for that lesson. "Is this serious with her?" "I don't know yet." "That's not good enough." "It's the honest answer." "No, the honest answer is the one you should have given me 4 weeks ago." Noah grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. "I need to go." "Noah, I'm not mad. I don't know what I am. I need to think." He stopped in the doorway and looked back. His expression was a mess of hurt and confusion and something that looked terrifyingly like disappointment. "You raised me, Dad. You're the only person in my life who never lied to me. And now I find out you've been hiding something this big for a month. I need to process that." He left. The front door closed. A moment later, his car started in the driveway and pulled away. Logan sat at the kitchen table and stared at the two coffee cups, one empty, one still half full. The house was so quiet he could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. He picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over Olivia's name. He wanted to call her, wanted to hear her voice tell him that it would be fine, that Noah would come around, that the damage wasn't permanent. But calling her right now felt wrong, like running to the person who'd caused the wound for comfort. Not because Olivia had caused it. She hadn't. Logan had caused it himself, through cowardice and silence and the particular kind of selfishness that disguises itself as protecting the people you love. He put the phone down. He washed both cups. He went to his workshop and spent the rest of the day sanding the Harrington table with a focus that bordered on violent, working the grain until his arms ached and the wood was smooth, and his mind was too tired to keep replaying the look on his son's face. At 7 that evening, his phone buzzed. Not Olivia. Noah. I'm still processing, but I love you. Don't do anything stupid. Logan stared at the message for a full minute. Then he typed back, I love you too, and I'll try. He set the phone on the workbench, leaned against the table he'd been sanding all day, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. The wood beneath his palms was warm and smooth. The rot had been cut away. The new lumber was grafted in, raw but solid. It wasn't seamless. You could see the join if you looked closely, a faint line where the old met the new. But it would hold. It would bear weight. It would last. Whether the same could be said for everything else in his life, Logan didn't know. But he stood there in the sawdust-thick air of his workshop, hands on the table he'd spent weeks saving, and let himself believe, cautiously, imperfectly, without any guarantee, that broken things could still be worth the work. Orchestrated narrative climax. Weaving emotional confrontations and life-altering choices. Orchestrated narrative climax. Weaving emotional confrontations and life-altering choices. 3 days went by without a call from Noah. 3 days of Logan checking his phone every hour, drafting texts he deleted before sending, and telling himself that space was what his son needed, even as the silence ate a hole through his chest. He worked on the Harrington table. He returned client emails. He mowed the lawn on Tuesday, even though it didn't need it, just to have something to do with his hands that wasn't reaching for his phone. Olivia called each evening. Their conversations had shifted, shorter now, more careful, weighted with the awareness that every word was building towards something neither of them could see the full shape of yet. She told him Marcus had started sleeping in the guest room. Not because of a fight, they hadn't fought, not really, but because the space between them and the bed had grown so wide that moving to a different room was just the physical manifestation of a distance that had existed for years. He still makes coffee for both of us in the morning, Olivia said on Tuesday night. Sets my cup on the counter, same spot, same time. Doesn't say anything about the guest room, doesn't ask why, just makes the coffee and goes to work. That sounds lonely. It is, for both of us. That's the thing people don't understand about relationships like this. It's not that one person is the villain and the other is the victim. We're both stuck. We've been stuck for so long that being stuck feels normal. What would unstuck look like? She was quiet. He could hear her breathing, slow, measured, the way she breathed when she was organizing her thoughts. Honest. Unstuck would look honest and terrifying. On Wednesday morning, Marcus called Logan. He was in the workshop, fitting a replacement spindle into a Windsor chair, when his phone rang with an unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He usually did with numbers he didn't recognize. But something made him answer. A feeling, an instinct, the particular electricity that precedes something you can't take back. Is this Logan Carter? The voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say. It is. This is Marcus Webb, Olivia's partner. Logan set down the spindle. He straightened up. His workshop suddenly felt very small. Marcus, I'm not going to yell at you. I want you to know that up front. I'm not calling to threaten you or accuse you of anything. I'm calling because I think we should talk, man to man, about what's happening. Logan leaned against the workbench. His mouth was dry. Okay, I'm listening. I found the messages a few weeks ago. Olivia told me you two knew each other years ago and that you'd been catching up. Coffee, walks, that kind of thing. She said nothing physical has happened, and I believe her. Olivia doesn't lie. It's one of the things I've always respected about her, even when the truth is inconvenient. She's telling the truth. Nothing physical has happened. I know, but we both know that's not the whole picture, don't we? Logan didn't answer immediately. He owed this man honesty. He owed him at least that much. No, it's not the whole picture. I've read the messages, Logan. Not all of them. I'm not that kind of man. But enough. Enough to know that what's between you two isn't casual. The way she talks to you, it's different from how she talks to anyone else, including me. Especially me. Marcus, let me finish. Please. A breath on the other end, controlled but not entirely steady. I've been with Olivia for 7 years. I know her. I know her rhythms, her moods, her tells. I know when she's excited about a deal and when she's faking enthusiasm for someone else's benefit. And I know, I've known for a while, that something has been missing between us. I've tried to ignore it, tried to call it a phase, a rough patch, something that would fix itself if we just kept going through the motions long enough. He paused. Logan waited. But the thing about motions is, they're just motions. They're not feelings. And watching Olivia light up every time her phone buzzes, watching her come home from one of your coffee dates looking more alive than I've seen her in 2 years, that's forced me to confront something I didn't want to face. What's that? That I can't make her happy, that maybe I never could, that I've been holding on to a relationship that works on paper because admitting it doesn't work in practice would mean admitting I failed at the one thing I thought I was good at. The rawness in his voice caught Logan off guard. He'd expected anger. He'd braced for accusations. Instead, he was listening to a man dismantle his own heart with the clinical precision of someone who'd spent too long pretending everything was fine. Marcus, I didn't plan this. I didn't come looking for her. I didn't even know she'd be at that wedding. I know, that almost makes it worse. If you'd pursued her, if you'd gone after a taken woman, I could be angry at you. I could make you the bad guy and keep the story simple. But you didn't do anything wrong, did you? You just existed. You just stood at a bar at a wedding, and 20 years of history did the rest. That's a generous way to look at it. I'm not being generous, I'm being accurate. There's a difference. Another pause. Logan could hear something in the background. The hum of an office, a keyboard, a world continuing its business, indifferent to the conversation happening inside it. I'm not calling to ask you to stop seeing her. I don't have the right to ask that, and even if I did, it wouldn't change anything. You can't tell someone to unfeel something. Then why are you calling? Because I need to hear you say one thing, and I need you to mean it. What? That you're not doing this out of nostalgia, that you're not chasing a 20-year-old memory because your life is quiet and she's exciting and it feels good to be wanted. Because if that's what this is, if you're going to pull her out of a stable life and into something that burns bright for 6 months and then dies, then I'm asking you, as one man to another, to walk away now, before the damage gets worse. Logan closed his eyes. The workshop smelled like linseed oil and sawdust. Outside, a truck downshifted on the main road. He thought about the question, really thought about it, not the easy answer, not the one that would make the conversation comfortable, but the real one. It's not nostalgia, he said. I know what nostalgia feels like. I've spent 20 years carrying it around. This is different. When I'm with her, I don't feel like I'm trying to recreate something from the past. I feel like I'm standing in front of something new. Something I didn't know I was missing until it showed up. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Logan checked his phone screen to make sure the call was still connected. That's what I was afraid of, Marcus said finally. His voice had lost its rehearsed quality. Now it just sounded tired. Because that's the answer of a man who means it. I'm sorry, Marcus. Don't be sorry for me. I'll be fine. I've been fine before. I'll figure it out again. A thin, humorless laugh. Just take care of her, okay? She's tougher than she looks, but she's also more fragile than she'll ever admit. She pretends she doesn't need anyone, and she's so convincing that most people believe her. Don't be most people. I won't. The line went dead. Logan stared at his phone for a long minute, then set it face down on the workbench and pressed both palms flat against the wood. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the weight of what had just happened. A man he'd never met had just handed him something precious and walked away, and the magnitude of that trust was almost unbearable. He picked up the spindle he'd been fitting and went back to work. The chair wouldn't fix itself. That evening, he called Olivia and told her about the conversation. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When he finished, the line was quiet for so long he thought she might have hung up. "He called you," she said at last. Not a question. "He did. What did he sound like?" "Hurt. Honest. Better than I would have been in his position." Marcus has always been better than the situation deserved. That's his problem and his gift. Her voice cracked on the last word, a tiny fracture that she covered quickly with a cough, but Logan heard it. "I need to talk to him. A real conversation, not the polite avoidance we've been doing. He deserves that." "Yes, he does." "I'm scared, Logan." "I know. Not of leaving. I've known I need to leave for longer than I want to admit. I'm scared of what I am when the structure falls away. My whole life has been structured. School, career, company, relationship, every piece stacked on the one before it, neat and ordered and purposeful. If I take out the relationship piece, does the rest hold, or does everything collapse?" "It holds." "How do you know?" "Because the structure isn't holding you up, Olivia. You're holding it up. You've always been the load-bearing wall, not the decoration. Take out Marcus and the house still stands. You just have an empty room." She made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. "An empty room." "Empty rooms can be filled. Is that a promise?" "It's an observation. I don't make promises I'm not sure I can keep." "That's annoyingly practical." "Yeah, I've been told." The next morning, Logan's doorbell rang at 7:15. He was still in sweatpants, coffee mug in hand, hair uncombed. He opened the door expecting a package or a neighbor. It was Noah. His son stood on the porch looking like he hadn't slept well. His jacket was zipped to the chin, even though the morning was warm and his hands were shoved deep in his pockets. Behind him, Mia's car was parked at the curb, engine running, Mia visible in the driver's seat looking at her phone. "Can I come in?" Noah asked. Logan stepped aside. Noah walked past him into the kitchen, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Logan poured a second cup of coffee without asking and set it in front of him. They sat across from each other. The morning light through the window, the kitchen table, the geography of every important conversation they'd ever had. "I talked to Mia," Noah said, "about everything. About Olivia. About you not telling me." "What did she say?" "She said I was being too hard on you. She said you're a grown man who's allowed to have a private life, and that I was acting like a kid who found out his dad was human." He paused. "She also said I was being a hypocrite because I didn't tell you about her for 3 months when we first started dating." "She has a point. She usually does. It's very annoying to be married to someone who's always right." A flicker of a smile, there and gone. "But Dad, that's not the same thing. I was 22 and scared you wouldn't approve. You're 32 and you're involved with a woman who's in a relationship. That's different." "It is different. You're right. I keep going back and forth. Part of me is angry, part of me understands, and part of me is just hurt. Because you've always been the person I could count on to tell me the truth, and you didn't. For a whole month you sat across this table from me and talked about weather and tables and wine, and the whole time you had this thing happening that was clearly important to you, and you just kept it from me. I was trying to figure it out before I brought it to you. That's not how this works. That's not how we work. You didn't figure out the hard stuff alone when I was a kid. You talked to me. You told me when money was tight. You told me when you were stressed. You treated me like a partner, not a kid you needed to protect. And now, when something actually matters, when something is actually changing your life, you shut me out." Logan set down his coffee. He looked at his son and felt the full weight of what Noah was saying settle over him. Not just the words, but the betrayal underneath. The sense that the rules Logan had established were rules he'd broken, and that the breaking was worse than any secret could have been. "You're right," Logan said, "about all of it. I was a coward. I told myself I was being careful, that I was waiting for the right time. But the truth is, I was afraid you'd react exactly the way you're reacting right now. And instead of trusting you to handle it, I made the decision for you. That was wrong. Noah stared at his coffee. He turned the mug slowly, one rotation, two. Is this serious? With her? Yes. Are you in love with her? The question hung in the kitchen like smoke. Logan could have dodged it, could have said, it's complicated, or I don't know yet, or any of the equivocations available to a man who wasn't ready to name what he was feeling. But Noah had asked for the truth, and after a month of withholding it, Logan owed him a surplus. I think I've been in love with her for 20 years, he said. I just didn't have a name for it until she walked back into my life. Noah's expression shifted. The anger was still there, but something else was moving behind it. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. The grudging acknowledgement that his father, the man who had always put Noah first, might finally need something for himself. What about her partner, Marcus? He knows. He called me yesterday. We talked. He called you? Yeah. And he's okay with this? No, he's not okay with it, but he's honest about it, which is more than most people would be. Noah leaned back in his chair and exhaled. It was the same exhale Logan had heard 1,000 times, after difficult homework, after arguments with friends, after the first time a girl broke his heart in 10th grade. The exhale of a young man processing something too big for a single breath. I don't want you to get hurt, Dad. I know. And I don't want you to hurt someone else. I know that too. Is she leaving him? That's her decision, not mine. But you want her to. Logan didn't answer. He didn't have to. Noah read his face the way he'd always been able to. With the fluency of a child who had learned early that adults' words and adults' faces don't always match. Just don't disappear on me, okay? Noah said. Whatever happens with her, with this, don't shut me out again. I can handle your mess, Dad. I've been handling it since I was 10. You shouldn't have had to. Maybe not, but I did, and I'm still here. He picked up his coffee and took a long sip. So, tell me about her. For real this time, not the cleaned-up version. Tell me who she is. So Logan told him. He told him about the summer 20 years ago, about the barbecue and the drywall joke and the takeout on the apartment floor. He told him about the airport goodbye and the years of not calling. He told him about the bar at the wedding, the champagne glass, the recognition that hit like a change in air pressure. He told him about the coffee shop, the park bench, the late-night calls. He held nothing back. And Noah listened the way he'd learned to listen growing up in this house, carefully, without judgment, with the patience of someone who knew that the full story was always worth waiting for. When Logan finished, Noah was quiet for a while. Mia had turned off the car and was sitting on the porch steps outside, scrolling through her phone, giving them space. She sounds like someone you've been waiting for, Noah said. I wasn't waiting. I didn't think she was coming back. Maybe that's the same thing. Logan looked at his son and felt something loosen in his chest, a knot that had been cinching tighter for days. Not because the conversation had been easy, it hadn't been, but because Noah was still sitting across from him, still drinking coffee at his table, still willing to be here even after the disappointment and the anger and the hurt. And that willingness, that stubborn, hard-won willingness to stay, was the most important thing Logan had ever built. Thank you, Logan said. For what? For coming over. For being angry at me to my face instead of disappearing. For being better at this than I am. Noah shook his head. I'm not better at this. I'm your kid. And your kid wants you to be happy, even when your kid is pissed at you. He stood up and carried his mug to the sink. I'm gonna go. Mia's waiting. But Dad? Yeah? Invite her to dinner, Olivia, next week. I want to meet her properly. Not as some name you've been hiding, as the woman my father is apparently in love with. Are you sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He paused at the doorway, his hand on the frame. Isn't that what you always told me? That being sure isn't the point. Showing up is the point. Logan watched him walk out, watched him stop on the porch to kiss Mia on the top of her head, watched them get in the car and drive away. The kitchen settled back into its quiet. 2 empty mugs on the counter. The coffee pot still warm. He picked up his phone and called Olivia. She answered on the second ring. How did it go? He's angry. He's hurt. He's also 24 years old and somehow more emotionally mature than I am. What did he say? He said he wants to meet you. Dinner, next week. A pause. Really? Really. He called you the woman my father is apparently in love with. His words. She was quiet long enough that he heard her swallow. Logan, I talked to Marcus last night, after we hung up. And? And I told him the truth. All of it. Not just about you. About us. About the 2 years I've been unhappy. About the distance I've felt. About the fact that I've been performing contentment instead of feeling it. How did he take it? Better than I deserved. Worse than I hoped. He sat there and listened to everything, and then he said, I know. I've known for a while. I just didn't want to be the one to say it first. Her voice wavered. We cried, Logan. Both of us. Not because we were losing each other. I think we lost each other a long time ago. We cried because it was finally over, because the pretending was done. Are you okay? No, not right now, but I think I will be. She took a breath. He's going to stay in the house until the end of the month. Then he's moving to his brother's place in Hartford. We're splitting things fairly. No lawyers, no drama. Just two people admitting that what they built isn't what either of them needs anymore. That's incredibly sad, Olivia. It is, and it's also the most honest thing we've done in years. She paused. I'm not going to pretend I feel good about it. I feel terrible. I feel guilty. I feel like I wasted 7 years of a good man's life because I was too afraid to admit I wanted something different. You didn't waste his time. You lived a life with him. That counts for something. Does it? Ask him in a year. I think his answer might surprise you. They talked for another 20 minutes. When they hung up, Logan stood in his kitchen and looked around at the walls he'd painted himself, the cabinets he'd refinished, the floor he'd sanded and stained on his hands and knees, while a 10-year-old boy watched from the doorway, suspicious and silent, not yet willing to believe that this house could be home. Everything in this room had been built by hand. Every surface bore the marks of effort and imperfection. A cabinet door slightly out of true, a baseboard seam that didn't quite close, a countertop stain from the time Noah knocked over a bottle of grape juice, and they both stood there watching the purple spread across the wood like a slow-motion catastrophe. Logan had never fixed that stain. It had become part of the kitchen's character, a record of a moment that was mundane and irreplaceable at the same time. He put his hand on the countertop, fingers resting near the edge of the old stain. The wood was warm from the morning sun. The house was quiet, but not empty. Full of years, full of memories, full of the accumulated evidence of a life lived carefully and sometimes fearfully, and always with the best intentions he could manage. He was standing at the crossroads Olivia had talked about, the place where the safe road and the uncertain road diverge, where you can see far enough down both to know that one leads back to everything familiar and the other leads into territory you haven't mapped. The safe road had served him well. It had kept Noah fed and housed and loved. It had given Logan structure and purpose and the steady satisfaction of a life controlled. But control wasn't the same as happiness. He knew that now. He'd known it for years, probably, but naming it required a kind of courage he hadn't possessed until a woman in a navy dress looked at him across a crowded room and made 20 years of careful distance collapse in a single glance. He wasn't sure what came next. He wasn't sure about any of it. Not about Olivia, not about Marcus, not about whether Noah's willingness to meet her meant acceptance or just curiosity, not about whether the new thing they were building could survive the wreckage of the old things they were leaving behind. But he was sure about one thing. He was done standing still. He was done rationing his own happiness because he was afraid of what reaching for it might cost. He was done being the man who watched from the edge of the room while everyone else danced. Logan Carter washed his coffee mug, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. Then he walked out to his workshop, opened the doors, and let the morning in. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with emotional depth and cinematic flow. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with emotional depth and cinematic flow. The dinner was set for Thursday. Olivia arrived at Noah and Mia's apartment at 6:30, carrying a bottle of wine that was probably too expensive for the occasion and a nervous energy that Logan could feel radiating off her from across the parking lot. He'd gotten there 10 minutes earlier, standing by his truck, waiting for her because he knew she'd need a moment before walking in. He knew this the same way he knew her public laugh from her real one, automatically, from a depth of familiarity that 20 years of separation hadn't touched. She parked beside him and sat in her car for a few seconds before getting out. When she did, she was wearing dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and an expression that was trying very hard to look composed. She was holding the wine bottle against her chest like a shield. "You okay?" he asked. "I've presented to boardrooms full of hostile investors. I've negotiated deals worth more than most people make in a lifetime. I once fired a CFO while eating a salad." She looked at the apartment building. "I have never been this nervous." "It's dinner, Olivia, not a deposition." "Your son hates me." "He doesn't hate you. He doesn't know you. He knows I'm the reason his father lied to him for a month. I'm the reason I lied to him for a month. You're just the context." She shot him a look. "That's a very diplomatic distinction." "I'm a diplomatic guy." "You're a terrible liar is what you are. That's why we're in this situation." He almost smiled. Almost. But the tension was real, and they both knew that what happened in the next 2 hours would determine the shape of everything that came after. Noah's opinion mattered to Logan more than any other opinion on Earth, and bringing Olivia into that space, into the kitchen where Noah and Mia were currently arguing about whether to use cloth napkins or paper, was either an act of extraordinary courage or extraordinary foolishness, and Logan still couldn't tell which. They walked up the stairs together. Logan knocked. Mia opened the door with a dish towel over her shoulder and a streak of tomato sauce on her wrist. "Hey, come in, come in. Ignore the mess. The sauce exploded, not like literally, but close. She reached for the wine bottle Olivia was holding. "Oh, this is beautiful. Is this a Barolo? Noah, look at this." Noah appeared from the kitchen. He was wearing an apron that said Grill Sergeant, a gift from Danny's wife. And his expression was carefully neutral, not hostile, not warm, somewhere in the territory between polite and guarded, where people stand when they've agreed to be open-minded but haven't committed to it yet. "Noah," Olivia said. She extended her hand. "It's nice to meet you properly." Noah shook her hand. His grip was firm, brief. "Same. Dad's told me a lot about you." "Recently, I imagine." A beat of silence. Mia glanced between them with the alertness of someone who could read a room at the molecular level. "Okay, the pasta's almost ready. Logan, can you grab glasses from the cabinet? The tall ones, not the short ones. The short ones are for juice." The first 20 minutes were stiff. They sat at the small dining table, cleared of wedding gifts now, though the unassembled bookshelf still leaned against the wall, and talked about safe, surface-level things. The weather. Mia's job at the design firm. The Barolo, which Noah admitted was significantly better than anything with a screw cap. Olivia complimented the apartment. Mia described their ongoing war with a neighbor who played drums at midnight. The conversation had the polished, effortful quality of a first date between strangers who hadn't decided yet whether they liked each other. Then Mia, who had either grown tired of the performance or was constitutionally incapable of sustaining one, said, "So, Olivia, Logan tells us you run a tech company. What's that like? Because I can barely manage 4 interns and they make me want to cry at least twice a week." Olivia laughed. The real one, caught off guard. "It's exactly like managing interns, except there are 400 of them, and some of them have MBAs, which makes them worse." "Worse how?" "They think they know everything. At least interns know they don't know anything. It's the people with 10 years of experience and a degree from Wharton who walk into my office convinced they've figured out the answer to a problem I've been working on for 3 years. And I have to sit there and listen because if I don't, I'm not collaborative." She made air quotes with her fingers. "That's corporate code for, she didn't agree with me, so she must be difficult." Mia leaned forward. "Do they do that because you're a woman?" "Sometimes. Not always. Some of them are just genuinely bad at their jobs, and gender has nothing to do with it. But there's a special flavor of condescension that only gets directed at women in leadership. The raised eyebrow when I make a decision without consensus. The suggestion that I sleep on it when a man in the same position would be praised for being decisive. I've learned to tell the difference between legitimate pushback and someone who can't accept that a woman is the one pushing." Noah had been quiet, eating his pasta, watching Olivia the way he watched people, with a careful, assessing attention that missed nothing. Now he spoke. How do you handle it? When someone's pushing back and you know it's not about the work? Olivia turned to him. She seemed to recognize that this wasn't casual conversation, that Noah was taking her measure, testing her the way he tested everyone who entered the small circle of people he trusted. I used to fight. Every battle, every slight, every time someone talked over me in a meeting, I'd push back hard because I thought that's what strong looked like. She paused. I was wrong. Strong isn't fighting every battle. Strong is knowing which ones matter and letting the rest go. It took me about 5 years and a near burnout to figure that out. Dad says something like that. He says a good carpenter knows when to sand and when to leave the grain alone. That's actually a pretty good analogy. Don't tell him that. He'll start putting it on a t-shirt. The table laughed. Not politely, genuinely. And something in the room shifted, a tectonic plate moving an inch beneath the surface. Not a resolution, not yet, but a crack in the wall Noah had built, wide enough to let a little light through. After dinner, Mia produced a store-bought tiramisu. I'm not insane enough to try making one from scratch. And they ate it on the couch because the dining table was too small for 4 people and dessert plates. Olivia sat on one end, Logan on the other, Noah and Mia in the middle. The cat appeared from wherever it had been hiding and climbed onto Olivia's lap with the presumptuous confidence of an animal that knows it's beautiful. That's Mochi, Mia said. She hates everyone. Consider yourself honored. Olivia scratched behind the cat's ears with the ease of someone who had done this before. I had a cat in college. Orange Tabby named Professor because he used to sit on my textbooks and stare at me like he was judging my study habits. Did he ever approve? Never. I graduated summa cum laude, and he still looked disappointed. Noah was watching this, watching Olivia hold the cat, watching his father watch Olivia. And his expression was changing. Not softening, exactly. More like recalibrating. Adjusting the image he'd constructed of this woman to accommodate the version sitting on his couch, eating tiramisu with a cat on her lap, making his wife laugh. When Olivia went to the bathroom, Noah leaned toward Logan and spoke quietly. She's not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know, someone more corporate, cold, put together in a scary way. He glanced toward the hallway. She's just a person. That's usually what people turn out to be when you let them. Don't get philosophical, Dad. I'm trying to compliment your girlfriend. She's not my... It's not... Dad, relax. I'm kidding. Noah picked at his tiramisu. Mostly. Olivia came back. The conversation drifted. Mia asked about the summer 20 years ago, and Olivia told the story of the barbecue where she and Logan met. The undercooked burgers, the warm beer, the drywall joke that wasn't funny, but she'd laughed anyway because the man telling it had the kind of eyes that made you want to give him a chance. What was the joke? Mia asked. Olivia looked at Logan. You tell it. Absolutely not. It wasn't funny then, and it's worse now. Tell it, Noah said. No. Dad, Logan sighed. Okay, a guy walks into a bar. The bartender says, what'll it be? The guy says, I just finished drywalling my living room. The bartender says, so why do you look plastered? Silence. Then Noah closed his eyes. That's the worst joke I've ever heard in my life. And I laughed, Olivia said, which tells you everything you need to know about my judgment at 20. Or your taste in men, Mia added. That too. They left at 10:30. In the parking lot, under a sky full of stars that were too faint to see properly because of the streetlights, Logan walked Olivia to her car. That went well, she said. Didn't it? Tell me it went well. It went well. Noah doesn't hate me. I told you he didn't. He was testing me, all night, every question, every look. He was deciding whether I was safe. He does that with everyone. I know, because you taught him to. She leaned against her car and looked up at the washed-out sky. He's a good man, Logan. You did something remarkable with him. I just showed up every day. The rest was him. You always do that. Deflect. Take the credit. You earned it. He shoved his hands in his pockets. The night air was cool, carrying the sharp green smell of somebody's freshly mowed lawn. Olivia, there's something I need to say, and I need to say it now before I talk myself out of it. She looked at him, waiting. I've spent the last 14 years putting Noah first. Every decision, every sacrifice, every time I chose responsibility over whatever I might have wanted for myself, it was for him. And I'd do it again, all of it, without hesitation. He paused. The words were harder than he'd expected, not because he didn't know what to say, but because saying it felt like stepping off a ledge. But Noah's grown now. He's married. He's building his own life. And for the first time in 14 years, I'm looking at my life and realizing that the person I built it for doesn't need me the way he used to. And I don't know who I am without that need. Logan, let me finish, because this is the part I've been afraid to say. He took a breath. I want you in my life. Not as a memory, not as someone I have coffee with on Saturdays, not as the ghost of a summer I can't let go of. I want you here. Present tense. And I know the timing is terrible, and the circumstances are messy, and there are 100 reasons this shouldn't work. But I've spent 20 years being practical and careful and responsible, and all it got me was a quiet house and a heart that still beats faster every time my phone buzzes with your name. She didn't say anything for a moment. The parking lot was empty except for their 2 cars and the orange glow of the street lamps. A car passed on the road, headlights sweeping across the pavement, and then it was dark again. I left Marcus 3 days ago, she said. Signed the lease on a rental in Guilford yesterday. A small place, 2 bedrooms overlooking the marsh. The movers come Saturday. She paused. I wasn't going to tell you tonight. I wanted to wait until I was settled, until it felt real. But you just said all of that, and I can't sit here holding this back. You left. I left 3 days ago. Packed 2 suitcases and the coffee maker, because I bought that coffee maker, and I'll be damned if I'm drinking hotel coffee while I rebuild my life. A weak laugh. Marcus helped me carry the suitcases to the car. He stood in the driveway and watched me leave, and he looked relieved, like someone who'd been holding a heavy thing for a long time and finally set it down. How do you feel? Empty, scared, free, all 3 at once, rotating in shifts. She crossed her arms, hugging herself against the cool air or against something deeper. I didn't leave for you, Logan. I need you to know that. I left for me. Because staying was killing something inside me that I wasn't willing to lose. You were the catalyst, but the decision was mine. I know. Do you? Because I need you to understand that I'm not trading one dependence for another. I'm not leaving Marcus's house to move into yours. I need to stand on my own first. I need to know I can. You can. You don't know that. I've known it since the summer you told me you were going to run a company someday and said it like you were reading your own future off a page. You've never needed anyone to hold you up, Olivia. You just convinced yourself you did because the world kept telling you that a woman standing alone looks incomplete. Her eyes glistened. She blinked rapidly, the way she always did when she was fighting tears. He remembered that too, along with everything else, along with the entire catalog of her mannerisms that he'd stored without permission in a part of his brain that refused to let go. I want to take this slow, she said. I know that's frustrating. I know you've already been waiting, and asking you to wait more it's not frustrating, it's right. He stepped closer, not touching her, close enough that he could see the streetlight reflected in her eyes. I've waited 20 years. I can wait a little longer. What if it doesn't work? What if it does? That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. I can't promise it works. I can't promise we won't drive each other crazy or discover that what we had at 20 doesn't translate to 30. All I can promise is that I'll show up every day, and I'll tell you the truth, even when the truth is hard. That's all I've ever been able to offer anyone. She reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched, the first physical contact since that handshake at the wedding, weeks ago. Her fingers were cold. His were rough, calloused from years of woodwork and restoration. They stood in a parking lot in Westbrook, Connecticut, holding hands like teenagers, and it was awkward and imperfect and absolutely nothing like the movies, and Logan wouldn't have traded it for anything. Slow, she said. Slow, he agreed. She squeezed his hand once, let go, and got in her car. He watched her drive away, taillights shrinking down the road, and stood there until the night was quiet again. When he got home, there was a text from Noah. Mia says she likes her. For what it's worth, I think I do too. Don't screw this up. Logan read it 3 times, then he typed back, working on it. The weeks that followed were neither easy nor graceful. They were the weeks of transition, the messy, unglamorous space between ending one life and beginning another, where nothing is settled and everything feels temporary, and the only thing holding you together is the stubborn belief that the discomfort means you're moving in the right direction. Olivia settled into her rental in Guilford. The place was small, a weathered cottage with creaking floors and windows that stuck when it rained and a view of the salt marsh that smelled like mud and brine at low tide. She filled it with the minimum: a bed, a desk, her coffee maker, a stack of books she'd been meaning to read for years. She worked from the kitchen table, running Meridian Group through video calls and emails, her bare feet on cold tile while she negotiated contracts and reviewed quarterly projections. She told Logan it was the loneliest she'd been in her adult life. She also told him it was the first time in years she could breathe. They saw each other twice a week, not more. That was the boundary they'd agreed on, enough to build something, not so much that it became a crutch. Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. They cooked dinner at her cottage, or walked the trail along the marsh, or sat on her back steps watching the herons stand motionless in the shallows, patient and impossible and somehow exactly right. They argued. This surprised Logan, though it probably shouldn't have. At 20, they'd argued about pizza toppings and movie choices. At 30 and 32, the arguments were heavier. Olivia's work schedule consumed her. She canceled a Wednesday dinner for a board call and didn't apologize until Logan pointed out that an apology wasn't optional. He pushed back too hard on a comment she made about Marcus, something about missing the stability, and she told him sharply that she was allowed to grieve a relationship without it being a threat to him. I'm not threatened, he said. They were standing in her kitchen, the remnants of a dinner neither of them had finished going cold on the counter. Then stop acting like it. Every time I mention Marcus, you get this look, like you're bracing for me to say I made a mistake. Did you? No, but I'm allowed to be sad about it. 7 years doesn't just evaporate because I moved out. I'm carrying grief and relief at the same time, and if you can't handle that, then we have a problem. I can handle it. Then handle it without the look. He wanted to snap back. The defensive part of him, the part that had spent years protecting himself from disappointment, wanted to build a wall and stand behind it. But he'd promised her honesty, and honesty meant admitting when you were wrong. You're right, he said. I'm sorry, I'm not used to this. Used to what? Being with someone who fights fair. Every disagreement I've ever had ended with someone walking away. You're the first person who gets angry and stays in the room. Her expression softened. Not completely. She was still irritated, still standing on her side of the argument, but the hardness went out of her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, Logan, but I need you to stop waiting for me to leave. Because that fear, that expectation, it's going to poison this before it has a chance to grow. I know. So stop. I'm trying. Try harder. He did. It wasn't instant. It wasn't a switch he could flip. The fear of abandonment had been wired into him long before Olivia, long before Noah, wired in by a childhood spent in a house where love was unpredictable and departure was the only certainty. But he worked at it the way he worked at everything, methodically, persistently, one day at a time, like sanding a rough surface smooth. Noah's acceptance came in stages too. The dinner had cracked the wall, but it took weeks of smaller moments to widen the opening. A Sunday when Olivia brought a ceramic pot to Logan's house and planted herbs on the kitchen windowsill because she said the kitchen needed life. Noah saw the herbs the next time he visited and didn't comment, but Logan caught him touching one of the basil leaves, rubbing it between his fingers, bringing it to his nose. A Thursday when Mia invited Olivia to help choose paint colors for the bathroom, the saga that wouldn't end, and Olivia suggested a shade called Still Water that Mia loved and Noah grudgingly admitted was better than sage green. Small things. The accumulation of presents. The gradual, wordless process of being woven into a family's fabric. One afternoon in mid-July, Noah came to Logan's workshop alone. He didn't call ahead, just showed up, standing in the doorway the way he used to as a kid, hands in pockets, weight on one foot, not quite crossing the threshold until invited. Got a minute? he asked. Logan set down the chisel he was holding. Always. Noah walked in and ran his hand along the Harrington table, which was nearly finished now, sanded, stained, and waiting for the final coat of polyurethane. This turned out good. It did. You can barely see where you replaced the legs. That's the idea. The repair should serve the piece, not show off. Noah pulled up a stool and sat down. He had the look he got before saying something important. A slight tension in his jaw, a directness in his eyes that he'd inherited from Logan or absorbed from him, depending on how you thought about these things. I owe you an apology, he said. For what? For how I reacted when you told me about Olivia. I was harsh. I made it about me, about my feelings, my sense of betrayal, and I didn't stop to think about what it took for you to say it. Noah, you don't need to apologize. You had every right to be upset. I had a right to be surprised. I didn't have a right to make you feel like wanting something for yourself was a failure of parenting. He paused. Mia said something to me a few weeks ago that I haven't been able to shake. She said, your father spent 14 years making sure you had a life. When did you start thinking he wasn't allowed to have one? Logan looked down at the table. The grain was visible through the stain, dark lines running in parallel, interrupted by knots and whorls where the tree had been stressed or bent. He ran his thumb along one of the knots, feeling the texture under his skin. She's smart, your wife. Smarter than me, significantly. Noah leaned forward. Dad, I spent my whole childhood watching you give everything to me. Every dollar, every hour, every ounce of energy. You never dated, you never went out, you never did anything that was just for you. And I think part of me got comfortable with that. Part of me liked being the center of your world because it meant you were always there, always available, always mine. You're still mine, Noah. I know, but I'm not the only one anymore. And that's okay. It took me a while to get there, but it's okay. He cleared his throat. Olivia is good for you. I can see it. You're lighter. You laugh more. You talk about things that aren't work or my problems. You've got this look on your face lately that I've never seen before, and it took me a while to figure out what it was. What is it? Hope. You look like a man who's hoping for something, and you're not used to it, and it shows. He smiled. It's a good look, Dad. You should keep it. Logan's vision blurred. He blinked, looked at the ceiling, pressed his tongue against the roof of his mouth. The same trick he'd used at the wedding. The same trick he'd been using for years whenever the feelings got too big for the container he kept them in. When did you get so grown up? I had a pretty decent role model. He made a lot of mistakes. Yeah, he did, and he owned every one of them. That's the part I want to keep. They sat in the workshop for another hour, talking about nothing and everything. The table, the business, Mia's latest bathroom color obsession, a woodworking class Logan was thinking about teaching at the community center. The conversation was easy and unremarkable and exactly what Logan needed. Not a grand reconciliation, just two men sitting in a room full of sawdust, being father and son the way they'd always been. Imperfectly, stubbornly, with more love than either of them was good at expressing. After Noah left, Logan stood alone in the workshop. The evening light came through the open doors in long, slanting bars, catching dust motes in the air. The Harrington table stood in the center of the room, restored and solid, bearing the invisible scars of its repair. He placed both hands flat on the surface. The wood was cool and smooth. He'd spent weeks on this table, cutting away rot, sourcing new lumber, grafting old and new together, sanding and finishing until the join was almost invisible. Almost. If you knew where to look, you could still find the seam. But seams weren't flaws. They were records. Evidence that something had been broken and put back together by someone who thought it was worth the effort. Logan turned off the workshop lights and walked across the yard to his house. Through the kitchen window, he could see the herbs Olivia had planted. Basil, rosemary, thyme, growing in the ceramic pot on the windowsill. They were small and slightly uneven, leaning toward the glass where the light was strongest. He went inside and watered them. Orchestrated final narrative arc, resolving all storylines comprehensively. Orchestrated final narrative arc, resolving all storylines comprehensively. The herbs died in August. Not all of them. The rosemary survived, stubborn and woody, clinging to the ceramic pot on the windowsill like it had something to prove. But the basil wilted in a heat wave Logan hadn't anticipated, and the thyme followed a week later when he forgot to water it for 3 days because he was finishing a rush order for a client in Fairfield who wanted a dining set restored before her daughter's birthday party. He came home on a Tuesday evening, saw the brown, papery remains drooping over the edge of the pot, and felt a disproportionate wave of guilt. The kind of guilt that's never really about the thing itself, but about what the thing represents. He was standing at the sink, trying to revive the thyme with water it no longer needed, when Olivia called. "How's your day?" she asked. Her voice had that end-of-day quality, slightly hoarse, the crispness worn off by hours of calls and meetings. "I killed the thyme." "You what?" "The thyme. In the pot. It's dead. The basil's dead too. Only the rosemary made it." A pause. "Logan, are you upset about herbs?" "I'm upset that you planted them and I let them die." "They're plants. I'll buy more." "That's not the point." "Then what's the point?" He turned off the faucet and looked at the pot. The rosemary stood upright among its fallen companions, green and defiant. "I don't know. I think I'm just tired. Come to Guilford this weekend. I'll make dinner. You can tell me about the thyme and I'll pretend it's a metaphor for something profound." "What if it is a metaphor?" "Then we'll deal with that too." He drove to Guilford on Saturday. The cottage looked different from the last time he'd visited. Not physically, but in the way a space changes when someone has started to inhabit it rather than just occupy it. A reading lamp in this corner that hadn't been there before. Books stacked on the coffee table, spines cracked, pages dog-eared. A throw blanket on the couch in a shade of blue that Logan recognized as close to the color of the dress she'd worn at the wedding. Whether that was intentional or coincidental, he didn't ask. Olivia cooked pasta with a lemon cream sauce she'd learned from a cooking show. It was slightly too acidic, and she knew it, and she said so before he could decide whether to lie about it. "It needs more cream," she said, frowning at her plate. "It's fine." "It's not fine. It's sour. Don't patronize me." "I'm not patronizing you. I'm eating your food and being polite." "Polite is a form of patronizing when the food is objectively too sour." He laughed. She glared at him, then laughed too, and the kitchen filled with the sound of two people who were comfortable enough to be honest about lemon cream sauce, which is a surprisingly high bar in any relationship. After dinner, they sat on the back steps. The marsh stretched out before them, flat and silver in the moonlight, the tall grass swaying in a breeze that smelled like salt and mud. Somewhere in the darkness, a night bird called, a single, clear note that hung in the air and faded. "I got an offer this week," Olivia said. She was holding a glass of wine, turning it slowly by the stem. "From a developer in Stonington. He's building a mixed-use property on the waterfront, residential above, commercial below. He wants me to consult on the commercial leasing strategy. That's local. Very local. 20 minutes from here." "Are you going to take it?" "I'm thinking about it. It would mean spending more time in Connecticut, less traveling, more presence, less performance." She took a sip of wine. "I've been running Meridian remotely for 2 months now, and the company hasn't collapsed. My COO is handling operations. The board is stable. Turns out the machine I built actually runs without me standing over it." "That must be a strange feeling." "It's terrifying. My entire identity for the last 8 years has been wrapped up in being essential. The person who holds everything together, the one they can't function without. Finding out they can function without me is like discovering that the building you've been holding up is actually standing on its own foundation. You feel relieved and useless at the same time." "You're not useless." "I know that intellectually. Emotionally is a different project." Logan understood this more than he could say. The parallel between Olivia letting go of control at Meridian and his own experience of letting go of Noah was so exact it almost felt engineered. Two people, learning at the same time that the things they'd poured themselves into could survive without their constant attention. That the measure of what you've built isn't whether it needs you forever, but whether it can stand when you step away. "Take the consulting job," he said. "Why?" "Because you just described it with more energy than I've heard in your voice in weeks. Because you're sitting on these steps in a cottage you chose for yourself, looking at a marsh you love, and you're telling me about a project that would keep you here instead of flying to a different city every Tuesday. And because I think you already decided to take it, and you're just looking for someone to confirm what you already know." She looked at him sideways. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "The thing where you see through me and say it out loud like it's obvious." "It is obvious. To me. That's the part that scares me." September came with cooler nights and the first suggestion of color in the maples along the road. Logan's restoration business had its best quarter in 3 years. Word of mouth had brought him a steady stream of clients, and the Harrington table, photographed and posted on a local antiques forum, had generated 4 new commissions. He hired a part-time assistant, a 20-year-old named Derek, who was strong and willing and terrible at sanding, but showed improvement by the second week. Olivia took the consulting job. She started working out of a co-working space in Old Saybrook 3 days a week, close enough to the cottage that she could walk on mornings when the weather cooperated. The remaining 2 days she spent on Meridian business, calls, strategy sessions, the quarterly board meetings she still led from her kitchen table with the kind of authority that made everyone forget she was wearing slippers below the frame of the webcam. Their lives began to overlap in ways that were domestic and unremarkable, and for that reason, significant. Logan kept a toothbrush at the cottage. Olivia left a jacket at his house. They developed a Saturday morning routine: farmers market in Guilford, coffee at the bakery on the green, a walk along the shore if the tide was right. They didn't discuss these rituals or assign them meaning. They just happened, the way things happen between two people who are slowly, cautiously, deliberately choosing each other. It wasn't all smooth. Nothing worth having ever is. In early October, Logan had a bad week. A client disputed an invoice claiming the restoration work wasn't up to the agreed standard. The claim was baseless. Logan's work was meticulous, and he had photographs documenting every stage. But the confrontation drained him in a way that went beyond the professional dispute. It hit something older, something wired into him from a childhood where his worth was always conditional, always subject to someone else's assessment, always one mistake away from being revoked. He withdrew. Not dramatically. He didn't stop calling or cancel plans. But he went quiet in the way that worried Olivia because she'd learned to read his silences the way he'd learned to read her laughs. The productive silence, the kind he fell into when he was focused on a piece of wood or thinking through a problem, was different from the protective silence, the one he used when he was hurting and didn't want to admit it. She showed up at his workshop on a Wednesday evening without calling ahead. He was sanding a chair leg, the same chair leg he'd been sanding for an hour, long past the point of necessity, in the repetitive, almost punishing way he worked when his mind was somewhere dark. "Hey," she said from the doorway. He looked up, sawdust in his hair, on his arms, covering his shirt. "Hey, you've been quiet." "I've been busy." "You've been hiding. There's a difference." He set down the sandpaper, looked at her. She was standing in the doorway the way Noah used to. 1 foot in, 1 foot out, waiting to be invited. The parallel was so precise it almost made him smile. Almost. "The Morrison client is disputing the invoice," he said. "Says the finish on the credenza isn't what she expected." "Is it?" "You know it is. I showed you the photos." "Then fight it. Send the documentation. If she doesn't pay, take it to small claims." "I know the process, Olivia. That's not the problem." "Then what's the problem?" He rubbed his face with both hands, leaving streaks of sawdust on his cheeks. "The problem is that every time someone questions my work, every time someone looks at something I've built and says it's not good enough, I'm 12 years old again, sitting in a group home waiting for another family to send me back. And I know that's irrational. I know a billing dispute with a difficult client has nothing to do with my childhood, but the feeling doesn't care about rational. The feeling just shows up and takes over." Olivia crossed the workshop. She stood in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with the linseed oil that permeated the room. She put her hands on his face, palms flat against his sawdust-covered cheeks, and held him there. "You're not 12 years old," she said. "You're a 32-year-old man who builds beautiful things and raised a remarkable son and has people in his life who see exactly how good he is. The Morrison woman is wrong. And even if she wasn't, even if the finish was off, even if you'd made a mistake, that wouldn't change your worth. Not to Noah, not to Mia, not to me." He closed his eyes. Her hands were warm against his skin. I know. Do you? Because you say you know, but then you disappear into this workshop and sand the same piece of wood for 3 hours and don't answer your phone. Old habits. Then let's build new ones. He opened his eyes. She was looking at him with an expression that was fierce and tender simultaneously. The expression of a woman who had spent her career demanding excellence and was now applying that same intensity to the task of loving a flawed man who didn't always believe he deserved it. I'm working on it, he said. Work faster. You're very bossy. I'm a CEO. It comes with the territory. He exhaled, a long, ragged breath that carried more weight than he'd realized he was holding, and pulled her into a hug. It was clumsy. His arms were covered in sawdust. She was wearing a white blouse that would need dry cleaning. Neither of them cared. They stood in the workshop, holding each other, surrounded by half-finished furniture and the smell of wood and oil, and Logan felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for as long as he could remember. Not a resolution, not a cure, just a loosening. The first millimeter of give in a knot that had been cinched for 32 years. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The Morrison dispute resolved itself in November. Logan sent the documentation, the client backed down, and the invoice was paid in full. He celebrated by taking Olivia, Noah, and Mia to a seafood restaurant in Mystic, where the portions were enormous, and the lobster bisque was so good that Noah declared it a life-changing culinary experience, which was the most dramatic thing Logan had ever heard his son say about food. At dinner, Mia announced that she and Noah were expecting. She said it between bites of bread, casually, as if she were mentioning a change in the weather, and it took a full 5 seconds for the table to react because the information was so large and so unexpected that everyone's brain needed a moment to catch up. Noah was the first to speak. We weren't planning to tell you this way. She was supposed to wait until... I couldn't wait, Mia said. I've been holding it in for 3 weeks, and I'm going to explode. Also, the bread is really good, and I'm emotional, and carbs make me confessional. Logan stared at his son. Noah stared back, his face caught between pride and terror and a kind of luminous disbelief, as if he'd been handed something precious and was still deciding whether he was allowed to hold it. A baby, Logan said. A baby, Noah confirmed. You're going to be a father. Yeah, that's what's happening. Logan reached across the table and gripped Noah's forearm. He didn't say anything for a moment because the words were stuck somewhere between his heart and his throat, jammed together in a bottleneck of emotion that no amount of tongue-pressing roof of mouth could fix. He looked at this man, this boy he'd carried out of a group home, this angry, silent child who'd broken a window and refused to eat and tested every boundary, and saw the father he was about to become. You're going to be great at this, Logan said. His voice was rough. He didn't try to fix it. You think so? I know so. Because you know what it's like to need someone who won't leave. And you'll never let your kid feel that way. Noah's eyes went red. He blinked hard, pressed his lips together, and nodded. Under the table, Mia found his hand and held it. Olivia was quiet through this. She sat beside Logan, watching the family she'd been gradually woven into, and her expression was one of someone witnessing something sacred. Not sacred in a religious sense, but in the human sense, the recognition of a moment that matters more than most moments and deserves the courtesy of silence. Later, in the parking lot, she leaned against Logan's truck and said, You're going to be a grandfather. I'm 32. And you're going to be a grandfather. That's terrifying. It's wonderful. It can be both. She took his hand, their fingers intertwined with the ease that comes from months of practice. Not the nervous electric grip of the first time in Noah's parking lot, but something steadier, worn in, like a path through the woods that gets smoother the more it's walked. Logan, I want to talk about something. Okay? I've been thinking about the cottage, about Guilford, about the commute to your place and the commute to Old Saybrook, and the amount of time I spend in a car versus the amount of time I spend with you. Are you saying you want to move? I'm saying I want to stop pretending that 2 separate houses 30 minutes apart makes any kind of logical sense when I spend 4 nights a week at yours anyway. He looked at her. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that flat orange glow that makes even beautiful things look slightly unreal. Are you asking to move in with me? I'm raising the topic for discussion in a structured, adult manner, with no pressure and no expectations. That's the most corporate way anyone has ever asked to move in with someone. I'm a CEO. Everything I do is slightly corporate. It's a character flaw I've accepted. He laughed. She didn't. She was watching him with that direct, steady gaze, the one that had always made him feel like she could see past his surface into the operating system underneath. Olivia, I live in a 2-bedroom house in Westbrook that I haven't remodeled since Noah was in middle school. The shower pressure is terrible. The backyard is mostly weeds, and the kitchen still has a grape juice stain on the counter that I've never fixed because it reminds me of my kid. I know all of that. I've been there. I've showered in your terrible shower. I've seen the weeds. I've put my coffee cup on that grape juice stain every Saturday morning for the last 2 months. And you still want to live there? I want to live wherever you are. The house is negotiable. The person isn't. He squeezed her hand. The night was cool, the kind of New England October cool that carries the promise of colder things coming. A car pulled out of the restaurant lot, headlights sweeping across the pavement, and then the darkness settled back. Move in, he said, but I'm fixing the shower pressure first. Deal. And the weeds. The weeds can wait. She moved in on the 1st of November. It was not, by any measure, a smooth transition. Her coffee maker replaced his. This was non-negotiable and happened within the first hour. His closet, which had served a single man perfectly well for a decade, was suddenly and dramatically insufficient for a woman who owned 47 blouses and a collection of blazers organized by color. The bathroom required a shelf expansion. The kitchen counter gained a spice rack, a mortar and pestle, and a French press that she used in addition to the coffee maker because sometimes you want espresso and sometimes you want something more contemplative, a distinction Logan did not understand but chose not to argue with. They bumped into each other, literally and figuratively. Two people who had lived alone for months, and in Logan's case for years, learning to share space in a house that had been designed for a man and his son. Olivia worked late, and the light from her laptop in bed kept Logan awake. Logan woke early, and the sound of the coffee grinder woke Olivia. She organized the pantry alphabetically. He rearranged it by frequency of use. They had a 20-minute argument about whether the toilet paper should roll over or under that ended with Olivia calling him historically and objectively wrong, and Logan calling her needlessly invested in bathroom tissue orientation. These were the small, stupid, essential frictions of cohabitation, the sandpaper that wears down the rough edges of two separate lives until they fit together. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but well enough to hold. There were harder adjustments, too. Olivia had nightmares sometimes. Not frequently, but enough that Logan learned the signs. The restlessness, the muttering, the sudden gasp that woke her at 2 or 3 in the morning. She never told him what the nightmares were about, and he didn't ask, but he learned to put a glass of water on her nightstand before bed and to keep his hand on her shoulder when the restlessness started, a steady pressure that sometimes eased her back to sleep without waking. Logan had his own patterns. He retreated to the workshop when stress overwhelmed him. The Morrison dispute was resolved, but other pressures took its place, and his default response to difficulty was still isolation, still the protective silence that Olivia had learned to recognize and refuse to accept. She didn't let him disappear. She followed him to the workshop, not to fix him, or counsel him, or offer solutions, but simply to be there, sitting on the stool in the corner, reading a book, existing in the same space while he worked through whatever he was working through. It wasn't a cure. It was company. And sometimes company was the only medicine that worked. December came with the first real cold. Logan winterized the workshop, insulated the pipes, and spent a weekend recalking the windows in the house, while Olivia directed operations from the couch in a wool blanket with a hot toddy that was more bourbon than hot water. "You missed a spot," she said, pointing to the upper left corner of the living room window. "I didn't miss it. I'm getting to it. You've been getting to it for 20 minutes. Some things take time, Olivia. You sound like my COO when I ask why the quarterly reports are late. Maybe your COO has a point."
On Christmas Eve, they hosted dinner at the house. Noah and Mia came, along with Danny and his wife and Mia's parents, Catherine and Robert, who had known Olivia for years through the nonprofit board and greeted her with the warmth of old friends rather than new acquaintances. The dining table, a piece Logan had restored years ago, long before the Harrington Commission, back when his business was just him in a rented space, seated 8 if you squeezed, and they squeezed. The food was imperfect. The turkey was slightly dry because Logan had been distracted by the window caulking and lost track of time. The mashed potatoes were too salty because Mia had been in charge of seasoning, and her philosophy was, if some is good, more is better. The gravy was excellent, which Olivia took full credit for despite the fact that Logan had made the roux. They ate and drank and talked too loudly and laughed at jokes that weren't funny and told stories that everyone had heard before. And the house, Logan's house, the house he'd bought for himself and a 10-year-old boy who didn't trust adults, was so full of noise and warmth and life that it felt like a completely different structure from the quiet, careful place he'd lived in for the past decade. After dinner, when the dishes were done and the guests had moved to the living room, Logan stepped out onto the back porch. The night was cold and clear, the sky thick with stars that were actually visible out here, away from the worst of the light pollution. His breath made small clouds in the air. The yard was dark, the workshop just a shape beyond the fence line. Noah came out a minute later carrying 2 beers. He handed one to Logan and leaned against the railing. "Good party," Noah said. "Your mother-in-law is a hell of a storyteller." "Catherine?" "Yeah, she doesn't have an off switch. Mia gets it from her." He took a sip of beer. "Hey, Dad?" "Yeah." "I want to say something, and I want you to just listen, okay? Don't deflect, don't make a joke, don't change the subject." "Okay." Noah turned to face him. In the porch light, he looked older than 24, older in the way that responsibility and impending fatherhood age a person, adding weight to the features without adding lines. "I spent a lot of years being angry, not at you, at everything else, at the system that bounced me around, at the families that sent me back, at whatever cosmic lottery decided I'd start life without parents who wanted me." He paused. "And then you showed up. This random guy in a flannel shirt who smelled like sawdust and couldn't cook anything except scrambled eggs and had no idea what he was doing. I really didn't know what I was doing. I said, 'Don't interrupt.'" "Sorry." "You showed up and you kept showing up every day, even when I broke things, even when I screamed at you, even when I told you I hated you and wished you'd never fostered me. You absorbed it, all of it. And you came back the next morning and made those terrible eggs and sat at the table and waited for me to sit down too." Logan's chest was tight. The beer in his hand was getting warm. The stars were blurring slightly, which was probably the cold. "I never told you what changed," Noah said. "What made me finally trust you? Do you want to know?" "Yeah, I want to know." "It was a Tuesday. I'd been living with you for about 3 months. I came home from school and you weren't there. The house was empty, and I panicked. I thought, this is it. He's gone. He left. Just like everyone else. I sat on the front steps and waited, and I was trying not to cry because crying was weak, and weakness got you sent back." Logan remembered that day. He'd been at a supplier in New Haven picking up wood stain, and his phone had died. He'd come home 40 minutes late to find Noah sitting on the steps, rigid and pale, his backpack still on. "You pulled into the driveway and got out of the truck carrying 2 bags of wood stain, and you looked at me and you said, 'Do you remember what you said?' I said I was sorry I was late. You said, 'Sorry I'm late, kid. Phone died. You hungry?' That's it. 4 sentences, no big deal, no drama. Just, 'Sorry I'm here. Are you hungry?' And something in my brain went, 'Oh, he came back. He said he'd be here, and he came back.' That was the moment. Not the adoption papers, not the first holiday, that random Tuesday when you showed up with wood stain and asked if I was hungry." Logan set his beer on the railing. He pressed his palms against his eyes. The cold air stung his knuckles. "Dad, are you crying?" "No. You're definitely crying. It's the cold. It's 60 degrees. I have sensitive eyes." Noah laughed, a warm, generous laugh, and put his arm around Logan's shoulders. They stood like that for a moment, father and son, on the porch of the house where they'd built their lives,
and the night was dark and cold, and the stars were indifferent, and none of that mattered because the warmth between them was older and stronger than any weather. "I'm glad she's here," Noah said quietly. "Olivia, I'm glad she found you again." "She didn't find me. We found each other. However it happened, I'm glad." He squeezed Logan's shoulder. "And I'm glad my kid is going to have a grandfather who shows up with wood stain and scrambled eggs. That's a pretty good deal." "The eggs have gotten better,"